Good morning, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff_2020. And this morning, I thought I'd just concentrate on the wonderful nature of being Irish or having Irish roots, because I found out something wonderful yesterday. And I'm going to tell you the story about my great grandmother when I finish this tune. But I'm going to start off with a little piece of music here, just because that's what I want to do today. This is my prize penny whistle. It's made in France in a long time ago. It is completely unique as far as I know. I've never seen another penny whistle like it or by this brand. I can hardly even read it right now. Let me see if I can see it, but I don't think so. Anyway, it's amazing because I found this in the back of my father's storage bin, my grandfather's storage bin. Grandpa, my McDuff's father, Grandpa, or Tom Sr. So there was two Toms. There was Grandpa Tom Sr. and my dad is Tom Sr., who we call McDuff. And anyway, I'm going to play this tune for you. Let me have a second to check in on YouTube and make sure we're going live here. Be right with you. Yeah, there we are. Okay. And it's good to have everybody here. I see we have Corky's here and Dora's here. Hey, Dora. 7 people watching. Well, that's fine. You know, there's so much politics going on right now. I get myself up in my head about it, and this is a good way for me to kind of calm down but share some information with you that I think is pertinent. And since you all want to know a little bit more about McDuff's real family, I'm going to share that with you this morning instead of trying to go into politics this morning. Just so let's think about this old whistle, tin whistle, that my grandfather apparently had but never told me about until I was clearing out his stuff at the McLean home in Simsbury, Connecticut, after he passed away. So here's my whistle tune for you this morning. I think I'll start with a jig and then I'll play my favorite slow air. This jig is called Larry O'Gaff. And there's a little jig for you. Well, you might imagine leprechauns dancing, but more appropriately, you might imagine soldiers marching. These tunes are generally tunes that were used as march tunes for the soldiers, and certainly in our American Revolution, we played tunes like that. So, anyway, good morning. Cheers. Have a cup of coffee. If I was in Ireland, I'd be drinking tea. berries tea. But I'm not I'm not there, and coffee's what turns me on right now. Mm. Now, I guess the next thing I want to do is remind you of this great portrait that I have of my father's family. And I'll show you Hannah in a close-up here. Let me just go ahead and show you her closer up. This is Hannah Kelleher O'Loughlin, and she is my great-great-grandmother. And Ross O'Loughlin and she were married in 1866. And for their 50th wedding anniversary, they got their family together in Willimantic, Connecticut, where they lived. And a portrait photographer did this wonderful photo. And my copy here doesn't really do it justice because it's very, very beautiful. In 1916, and it was published in the local paper. So, along with my subscription to newspapers.com, which I've recently been exploring, I was able to see that they had named all of the people in the photo, and of course I already knew most of them. But what it really shows me is that my great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother had a wonderful extended family. And if you look between them, there's one single row with a little girl in the front. That is Catherine. Directly above her is Uncle Henry, and directly above him is my grandfather Tom. So that's Tom Sr. kind of in the center in the back row. Now, that's right. The fifers would play these tunes, Corky. That's absolutely right. So I'm sorry for a little bit of shadow on that photo, but I didn't have much time to make a copy for you. Anyway, this is Hannah, and she was born in 1841. And I never knew before yesterday that there was a obituary printed in 1924 for Hannah. And I'm going to show this to you because this means a lot to me. Hannah according to this obituary was born in Innistimon in County Clare, Ireland. Well, I had never known for sure where my ancestors came from. But now I know. There's no doubt about it with this obituary. You see, my father didn't know where we were from in Ireland, and he always wanted to have time to look it up, but he couldn't. He never had the time or the opportunity. My grandfather didn't know. And the reason that he didn't know must be because of the immigrants' determination not to be Irish, to try somehow to climb the ladder into the American establishment. And so these are the type of upward climbing Irish that you might consider to be lace curtain Irish. You think I resemble her? Maybe I do. She looks kind of determined, doesn't she? I think she looks very, very proud of what she's accomplished since she immigrated to the United States in 1860. And here it is, 1916, and she has this wonderful family all around her. So I'm going to read this obituary. Mrs. Ross O'Loughlin, Mrs. Hannah Kelleher O'Loughlin, widow of Ross O'Loughlin, who was well known in Hartford County, died at the home of her daughter, Miss Thomas Henry, Mrs. Thomas F. Henry, in New Haven after a short illness. She was born in Ennistimon, County Clare, Ireland. And guys, until yesterday, I never knew that my ancestors were, I couldn't document where they were from. It was just family from my granduncle Frank, who told me that he had gone over to Ireland and found out where we came from. So, hey, kiss me. I'm Irish. So that's a blessing that I got from spending some time yesterday looking at newspapers.com. And all you have to do is to put in somebody's name, and it'll bring it all up there. So she was born, it says 1838, but I think she was born in 1841 according to the U.S. Census. Anyway, she came to the United States in 1860. Ross O'Loughlin, the O'Loughlins and the Kellehers are all from the same area right by Ennistimon and Lahinch, and all over the west part of County Clare. So their families would have known each other, and I do believe that Ross came over as what appears to be a part of the O'Loughlins that had come over earlier, and I found a man named Patrick O'Loughlin who was married to Bridget Kelleher, and I'm wondering if Bridget and Hannah Kelleher were sisters who came over on their own as single girls and got married here to Irishmen from the same location that they had come from in Ireland. Excuse me a second. I've done a lot of studying about Irish America, Irish Americans, and the great tragedy of the Civil War killed many, many Irish immigrants on both sides of that war. There was a famous man named General Thomas Francis Maher, Meagher, same name as Bill Maher, the talk show guy, spelled a little differently. And it turns out that Maher was an Irish activist in the Rising in the 1840s, which was easily put down, and he became a fugitive. He ended up, he was either transported or fled and went to Australia. And then from Australia, he got on a ship and went to San Francisco, where he was welcomed among all the other Irish that had ended up in San Francisco after the gold rush. And anyway, he became a politician and went to New York. And in New York, when the Civil War was starting, the Irish immigrants were basically against the war. They would just as soon have the South keep all the black people down there and not integrate them up into the cities where the black people were, of course, taking jobs and making the wages lower and lower for the immigrants that were already suffering, such as the Irish people. Mobster, I agree with you. That's cool. Your Irish ancestors were marrying people from the same village. Yeah, and I think that's what happened here. So when I was, um, well, let's see, in 1980, I went to Ireland. It was my first big trip. I went to London, and then I traveled over to Dublin in Ireland, excuse me, and went out to the West Coast and just talked to people and found somebody that I had heard existed, a man named Dr. Kelleher. And Dr. Kelleher is a country doctor out in the west coast of Clare. And, you know, maybe a generation older than me at the time. And so out of the blue, I was at a small hotel there in Lahinch, and I found his phone number in the phone book and called him up. And this was so amazing to me. I was, you know, fresh from America, sitting there in a hotel. I didn't know anything or anybody. But I called this number and asked for Dr. Kelleher, and he said, speaking. And I said, my name's John O'Loughlin, and I've come to Ireland to do some research into my roots. And my great uncle Frank said that he was here in Lahinch once years ago and had met you and talked to you about the O'Loughlins and the Kellehers. And so Dr. Kelleher says, was he a man of many wives? And it turns out Frank had had like 5 wives. So I said, yes, that's the man. And Dr. Kelleher says, don't go anywhere. I'll be right there. So he came down and we went into the pub there at the hotel and sat next to each other and compared our lives and stayed up late and drank Guinness, and that was awesome. So God bless you, all my Kellehers and all my O'Loughlins. What a wonderful night that was. 40 years ago. So here's to you, Hannah Kelleher, and Ross O'Loughlin, and all the ancestors. I'll play this air for you now. It's the air that I played at my father's gravesite last March when we celebrated his 100th birthday. When my grandfather died, it was in the 80s, the late 80s. He had been in a nursing home, a real nice nursing home called McLean Home in Simsbury, Connecticut. And among his belongings, aside from that whistle, which I really, just treasure. I mean, I've never seen one like this in the entire world, and I've looked. I mean, you won't see another whistle like this. It's made out of perhaps some pewter in it or something. Anyway, but enough about the whistle. Here's something else that's even more important. This book here, let me show it to you better. Okay, you can see it's called Real Lace, America's Irish Rich. Okay. I'll show you the spine because I think it's kind of amusing. This is the spine with the library number from the library at Simsbury, Connecticut. Well, it turns out that at the time he died, he had been reading this book because this book was with him at the time. Now, the book itself is written by a man named Stephen Birmingham, and it tells all about the Irish families that became rich in the 1900s and the 20th century, sort of magically, like the Doheny, who was the guy that got very, very rich in the Teapot Dome oil scandal and then lost it all. The McLeans, who, again, another one of those get-rich-quick families, which all that money causes dissension and the breakup of the family. But it turns out that in most cases, and I think in all cases, these Irish families lose anyway. Okay? Yeah, the book is Real Lace by Stephen Birmingham. See, I didn't want to mess with it, so I won't look for the date of publication. But I had this book on my shelf, and I'm looking at Maeve Brussels' material on the web, and if you haven't run into Mae Brussel yet, she's one of the great researchers and radio hosts of the 60s and 70s. Her last name is Brussel, Brussell, and her first name is Mae, M-A-E. Well, when she was describing how the church was getting its funds for what was going on with the Gladio program, she talked about Spellman, Cardinal Spellman, and then Marcinkus, who was the Chicago guy, the cardinal from Cicero, Illinois, and other Catholic prelates and leaders, and how they would approach a Irish couple that maybe had made some money like this and tell them that the church needed them to support what they're doing, and if they were able to support us, that the bishop or the cardinal would be able to get you into something really important called the Order of St. Gregory or the Knights of Malta. And it is the Knights of Malta that are the activists now in our CIA and in the covert wars. So what I'm telling you is Grandpa, Daddy's father, was on the track. Tom Sr. had this very book among his belongings when he died. And it had in it some of his bank statements as bookmarks and things like this that you just I mean, it's like he's saying, John, read this book, So I read it. Do you believe that we retain information in our DNA from our ancestors? Do you? I do. I have to. It has to be the case that we learn things in our genes, in our DNA, in the process of being born from our parents and their parents. They say it goes back seven generations, right? Well, my 7 generations go back to Ennistymon in County Clare, Ireland. And I think this find yesterday of this wonderful obituary. There's one more thing I want to show you about this obituary, which I forgot earlier. Let me get it back up here again. It says that she is survived. I'm sorry, I can't quite read it. Let me make it bigger again. Here we go. They celebrated their golden anniversary in 1916. Mrs. O'Loughlin leaves 2 sons, John J. O'Loughlin of Hartford, and that's my great-grandfather, and Dr. Thomas F. O'Loughlin of Rockville, Connecticut. Excuse me. And Dr. Tom was Frank's father. Frank is the man that clued me in about Dr. Kelleher over there in Ennistymon, Lahinch area of County Clare. So, 2 sons, John and Thomas, 2 daughters, 9 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. 1 great-grandchild. And who was that great-grandchild? It was McDuff. It was my dad, Tom Jr. So all this stuff ties together for me in an amazing, beautiful way, and I see a lot of you agree with me that we do have these memories. I mean, how do animals know that they need to follow a certain migration pattern, or how do they know even what to hunt, what not to hunt, when to fight and when to run? This has got to be genetic material that we learn, and we as humans are both mammals and spiritual creatures, and this has got to be the important link to the past is through our families. So as I can strengthen my roots by contacting people through Ancestry.com or Genie or these other services that they have now, I can solidify the pathways in my brain to connect with that old ancestral experience, ancestral knowledge. This is why they create refugees. This is why, for instance, Ed Lansdale, in order to destroy Vietnam, created a false fear on the part of the North Vietnamese Catholics that the communists were coming and were going to take everything from them and rape their daughters and all that horrible stuff that propaganda says to innocent people. I mean, he was dealing with innocent people that had lived for thousands of years in the same way. But by scaring them, he was able to get them to move down to South Vietnam on Navy ships and airplanes and all that stuff, making money, of course, for the people providing the transportation. But then they just dumped them in South Vietnam with no roots, with no family, with nothing. And the people present in the South were not ready to take these people in, and that's just a great way to cause strife and conflict, and also on a national basis to destroy the roots that people have to their ancestors. And the importance of ancestors in these what we call primitive cultures, I think in many ways smarter than ours, is that's how they know how to live. So they destroyed all of the traditional roots by shifting people around and mixing them up. And mixing them all up here in the United States by forcing people to immigrate. People didn't leave Ireland because they wanted to see some new horizons. They left Ireland because they were absolutely desperate, because the population of Ireland was being reduced by a plan that there were just too many peasants, and we had to get rid of some of these peasants so we could run our manorial estates and not have to have the British Army here to protect us while we're running our British manorial estates. So they sent my ancestors overseas, and my ancestors did everything they could to survive, and what they had to do was to deny their very Irishness. Can you imagine denying who you are in order to survive? It had to be very tough. And then because they spoke Irish. They didn't speak English. These are Irish-speaking people. But they learned English, and they would not speak Irish at home, and they would not let their children learn the roots of their families. And that was because they had to blend in, or else they would die out. So now, when you get to me, as someone who's been able to wrap his arms around these 6 generations, they don't want us to see this. Their whole propaganda is to create us as blank slates. You've heard this before, right? The whole idea of the Malthus and Galton and all the eugenicists is that when humans are born, we're blank slates, and the only thing that we know is what we learn through experience and what we're taught. And that is the opposite of what I think a healthy approach to who we are is. If we don't know who our parents are, where our roots are losing a huge amount of ability to function in this world. When I was in Ireland in 2010, I had the pleasure of meeting a kinsman from Australia. His name is Bob O'Loughlin. And Bob O'Loughlin had done everything he possibly could to trace his roots to Ireland, but he could not make the connection. He couldn't find, a name or anything because his roots had been transported as criminals. And they didn't provide you with any information where you ended up in Australia, Van Diemen's Land, New South Wales. Australia is full of people that were transported in order to get them off of the Lord's manorial acres and have them get out of his way so that he could exploit the rest of the people. That's what the British lords do all over the world, and they did it in Ireland. So we have to hang on to what we have. And my kinsman Bob, a wonderful man, very successful in life, but he'll always have that hole of not being able to know. And this incredible obituary that I found yesterday has closed that gap for me. And I do hope that you and in your ancestry research are successful and find a key like this that can give you a solid link to your roots. Now, this, of course, is just one of my roots, but being from a kind of a paternal tradition, it's the first one I've really searched. I'm looking now into my grandmother Peg, who's my dad's mother, Margaret Coakley. I've told you a little about her. She was musically inclined, and I think that's where I got my musicianship from. But isn't it sad that none of my Irish relatives played the tin whistle? None of them played the accordion or the fiddle or the piano. They were all trying to be these straight-laced American wasp types, like my Uncle John. Well, that's all I got this morning. I'm glad to have had you along with me for this diversion from the stress and strain of politics and the perversity of YouTube and the global masters of communication that keep us from talking to one another as frankly and with the truth that we are entitled to as human beings. These people that are trying to impose a totalitarian nightmare. Well, you know how I feel about them, so with that, maybe another tune and we'll call it a morning. Well, the Sligo Maid is the name of that tune. Another old jig from the 1800s or even before that. Thanks a lot for being with me this morning. I'll see you tonight. And if I can ask you to tune in tonight, I think we're going to have a great show with George and Dr. Hamamoto at 8 p.m. for the Thursday night